The first-person medieval slasher, the newest in the genre being Chivalry 2, and my has it released to a massive success. Chivalry Medieval Warfare, its predecessor, gained 1.3 million sales within the first 9 months, and it looks like Chivalry 2 is probably going to be heading that and maybe even surpassing it. Of course, this video is talking about Chivalry 2 and its relationship with Mordhau. Both games very similar, based on a very unique genre that it seems to be dominated by these two titles. But how do they compare to each other? Of course, since Chivalry 2 is the newest, I'm going to be mostly talking about this game and the changes that it does from Mordhau. So without further ado, Chivalry 2 versus Mordhau. What's changed? First off, one of the things that seems to be going around a lot, and something that I have said, but I'm going to get it out of the way since it seems to be the most obvious part that a lot of people have noticed when comparing these two games together, is, well, how casual it is. Chivalry 2 really takes the biscuit when it comes to more casual and fun gameplay. That's not saying Mordhau doesn't have that enjoyment factor, it definitely does, but it's for different reasons. It doesn't necessarily focus on the larger scale maps like Chivalry 2 does. Yes, it does have some sieges pushing up battering rams and siege towers to walls, but Chivalry 2, all of them are that size. There's very few smaller, close quarter type maps which make for some massive scale medieval gameplay. Of course, this really comes into the combat as well, to whether it's more hardcore or casual. One of the main things that Chivalry 2 does that I don't think many people were expecting is the holding blocks. Blocking is one of the most important things during these games in terms of trying to factor in skill in combat. Mordhau in the original Chivalry, you used to be able to right click and it would block for a second or so. This meant timing your blocks onto the attacks of enemies was paramount in order to not being hit, but it also meant that enemies could feint around your blocks, try and get you to block too early, and then they can get in and get those stabs on your body. But Chivalry 2 doesn't do this. You can hold right click in order to hold that block against the enemy, blocking 1, 2, 3 strikes, all while staying safe. It also drains stamina as you do it. One of the main things that this does is completely change the way that shields work in Chivalry 2. You see, Mordhau had shields, and a lot of people complained that they were too powerful, because that's the only way you could hold a block in Mordhau. However, because in Chivalry 2, any weapon that you have, you can hold right click to hold a block, basically shields are completely nerfed. Their only real use now is defense against arrows, and even then archer numbers are limited on the battlefield, so it's not exactly the winning or losing factor during a game. In Chivalry 2, when you do a successful block against the enemy, you can then go into a quick attack, and it will actually speed up your attack depending on how successfully you blocked the enemy's previous attack on you. Much like Mordhau, you have dragging and speeding up attacks depending on how quickly you move your mouse from one side to the other, but all in all, as I'll get into a little bit later, the vast variety of different attacks and weaponry uses you have in Chivalry 2 very much makes it more enjoyable in terms of different experiences, yet more casual, which I think could put a lot of veteran Mordhau players off, that were coming from a game that really focused on these quick flowing duels. It's about skill in that game, and whilst there is some skill factors to Chiv 2, as you'd probably expect, it's very much less so. You'll often find yourself in mosh pits, slashing from side to side, taking out multiple enemies with each swing, and it is incredibly bloody, gory, and enjoyable, but a lot more casual. Furthermore, one of the biggest differences off the battlefield are to do with customization. Both Chivalry 2 and Mordhau do offer some sort of customization, however, Mordhau really takes it when it comes to the actual in-depth customization that you can have. Granted, we are talking about Chivalry 2 the day after its release, but it doesn't look like they're going to go down the customization route really much at all. In Mordhau, you can make completely custom classes. There were a few presets that you could use, but even then you could edit them, their different abilities, the skills, the weapons that they could use, the armor that they wear, some being cosmetic and some being actually useful to defending yourself in the battlefield. However, Chivalry 2 doesn't do this. It's all preset classes that you choose from knights to vanguards to archers to support. Each of these classes also have subclasses. For example, the archer has a bowman and it also has crossbowmen. You can also have things like ambushers or swordsmen, halberdiers or hammer wielders, all in the subclasses of these 4 main classes. And I think the way Chivalry 2 does it kind of works for the gameplay style and definitely reinforces that more casual feel. It definitely helps in terms of balance. I remember the early days of Mordhau, there'll be some weapons that everybody would choose. There'd be some abilities that everybody would go for because they were more powerful. Of course, as time went on, development changed this and nerfed certain things and boosted other abilities and weapons in order to balance it out, but Chivalry 2 from the get-go is ultimately way more balanced just because of the limitations that they put to it. However, there are customizations within these classes. classes. But apart from the weapons and the look of your actual character, which are cosmetic, there isn't a ton when it comes to actual customizations. But this moves us on really well to abilities. You see, Mordhau, as I mentioned, had completely customizable classes that not only could choose your weapons and armor, but also the abilities that they used, whether it was dodging, being more resistant to fire, having better stamina, doing more damage the more kills they get, or doing more damage the closer they are to death. These abilities have been completely discarded by Chivalry 2, and some have made the way in just by default classes. For example, everybody has bandages now. You don't have to add that to your class. Dodging is just now a feature that any normal person can do within the game. You don't have to add it as an ability for your character. And things that used to be equipment in Mordhau, like fire pots, are now part of a class ability. These can't be changed, and they have to be charged up over time depending on how many kills you get within your game. Depends on how quickly you can use them. This means you don't have that fire pot spam, but you still get the ability to use them, but only as a reward if you've already helped your team enough already. Keeping up with the fast pace, Chivalry 2 does something that has really been made popular by, funnily enough, Call of Duty Warzone, and this is being downed on the battlefield. Unless you get decapitated straight away, your character's going to be crawling around the floor. It gives you the chance to get revived by a teammate, or even be able to punch the enemy 2 times to get back up. Now you may be wondering, people have done this before in games, what do you mean inspired by Warzone? Well, the general idea of fast-paced, speedy gameplay, the more chances that people have to get back up into the battlefield, the more chances that they have to keep on going, to keep on playing, the more excitement and the more adrenaline fueled these games are going to be. And I think Chivalry 2 really understands that, and that's one of the main reasons I think it's been put within the game. Another addition to this is stamina. Stamina in Mordhau would drain pretty fast. Of course, you had abilities in order to make it drain a bit slower, but pretty much any attack, block, jumping, sidestepping you did would drain your stamina, and it meant that a lot of the time you'd have to pull out of battles and you had to be very strategic about it. I quite like the fact that you'd have to be watching that all the time, that you wouldn't be able to do prolonged battles for more than 2-3 strikes in a row before you'd have to step back, maybe take a few blocks, and then you could go back in for more strikes. Chivalry 2 stamina doesn't really seem to have this pressure added to it. Don't get me wrong, you will get to points where you have to take a step back from the battlefield in order to regain it. Running, sprinting, jumping doesn't really use stamina, and this means that the battles are able to go on for way longer, and you're able to take down way more enemies in rampages rather than having to pause to break to catch your breath. Now, I mentioned at the top of this video that there are way more attacks within the game of Chivalry 2 compared to Mordhau. Of course, you have dodging, which is just an attack anyone can do. Not only can you do normal attacks with your swords and weaponry, but you can also hold left click in order to do heavy attacks to hit through 2, 3, sometimes even 4 enemies in one swish. Flying kicks are a really satisfying part of the game, and yes, I know kicks are in Mordhau, but they're not quite as useful as they were in that game, because you have the jab now. Being able to hit someone with your non-weapon hand just to stun them for that split second to get another attack in, and these are incredibly useful. Jabbing currently in Chivalry 2, because it's a new feature that hasn't been in the first Chivalry, or even in Mordhau, is very underused, so people don't really expect you to use it. So if I was you, use your jabs. Additionally, you have the Q button. When you're sprinting with some classes, you can charge into the enemy and rugby tackle them to the floor, or you can do some massive swings around your head with the cost of making you vulnerable with the amount of time it takes, but coming down with massive slams that will sometimes one-hit enemies if you get it in the right position. All of this together makes for something quite interesting. Of course, you can tell that Mordhau and Chivalry completely bounce off each other with ideas. The developers have played each game, and you know that they have, but Chivalry 2 really does feel like it's done enough to put itself in its own corner. Whilst I've called this Mordhau versus Chivalry, I think they both stand in parallel with each other in many ways. Of course, there's some things like I prefer, like the larger and more epic scales in Chivalry 2. If I'm going for a casual game, I'd pick Chivalry 2. But if I want some really cool, flowing, fast combat that looks beautiful on screen, I'd pick Mordhau. And I think there's going to be a lot of crossover between the two with players, but there's also going to be some backlash from each side. You see, the Mordhau veterans seem to be, well, I don't know any way to put this, but very elite. We've seen this in games before, and Mordhau seemed to breed that elitist type of gamer as well. And you can see why. It's very skill-based, and it is an incredible experience when you're at that top level in terms of melee combat. But during the first few months of Mordhau, I got pretty good at it. And then coming to Chivalry 2, luckily I was able to play in the beta, so I got to hang of the new combat before everyone else was allowed in. But I think for a lot of people that are used to Mordhau's combat, it might make them a little bit angry coming to Chivalry 2, because you're not able to pull off those cool feints all the time. You're not able to slip around the enemy's guards and get in at the correct moment. Yes, you can do this, but because of the more casual nature, most of the time there's going to be people surrounding you, and you're just going to have to fight for your life. And whilst a lot of people will love that, and it is way more accessible to the wider audience, I do feel like there's a lot of Mordhau veterans that may be against that sort of thing. But please, let me know what you think comment down below. Did you play the original Chivalry, and how do you think the sequel compares to that? Did you play Mordhau, and how do you think the combat in Chivalry 2 faces up against those mechanics? Please let me know down below. But leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't. But until then, I will see you in the next one.